Hey there, I'm Ryan Boehme, and you're tuning into So You Want to Teach Percussion. This video series is designed particularly for my current Percussion Methods students. Since they aren't able to have a typical Percussion Methods experience due to the current global pandemic, these videos are designed to give them a foundation of the technique outside of class time so that we have more time to play when we're together. But I also hope this video series can be helpful to any music educators out there. Today, we're talking about Drumset. Drumset is one of my favorite instruments. It combines elements from a lot of other instruments we've covered in previous videos, and it's a unique instrument that can be used in a ton of different styles. But drum sets are so massive that sitting down at a drum set can be pretty intimidating for the students in your concert bands or jazz band. In this video, I'm not going to tell you everything about Drumset, but I am going to go over a ton of basic topics that you're going to want to know as an educator so that you can get your students started on the right path. We're going to be looking at playing position, coordination, and implement options. So grab your drum set and let's get started. First, we're going to talk about playing position. A standard drum set involves a lot of drums and cymbals, and sometimes a few extra toys like some cowbells and tambourines. And the drum set player is usually going to be responsible for playing multiple instruments at once with their hands and their feet. So it's important for your students to find a setup that allows them to play all the instruments at their disposal comfortably. But before we talk too much about setup, let's talk about the anatomy of a drum set. We'll start with the snare drum. The snare drum is typically the central point of a drum set. It's going to be the drum your students will use most often, providing the backbeat for grooves. Unlike the crisp, articulate sound your students will search for with their orchestral snare drums, drum set snare drums have a lot more flexibility, and they can be effective at low tunings or high tunings. Your students can also experiment with muffling the head or leaving it open, as the resonant sound of an unmuffled snare drum isn't so undesirable with drum set. And down here we have the kick drum or bass drum. These serve a similar role to concert bass drums, providing that low-end sound that helps to balance the higher voices of the drum set. But drum set kick drums are going to typically be a lot smaller than concert bass drums, and you'll play them with a foot pedal. Kick drums come in many sizes, usually ranging from 16 inches to 22 inches. This one here is a 16-inch kick drum. Since it's so small, it can be tuned to provide a resonant tonal sound that can work well for jazz. It can also be tuned lower to give a deeper sound that's more characteristic of rock and roll. The other drums surrounding the snare drum are called tom-toms. These will typically have two heads like the snare drum, but the sizes are more varied. The smaller, higher pitched tom is called a rack tom. The rack tom on this kit is mounted on the kick drum, but sometimes you may see rack toms mounted on cymbal stands. The other tom I have here is a floor tom. Floor toms have their own legs and they sit on, you guessed it, the floor. These will usually be much deeper than rack toms, which help to give them a lower tone. Most right-handed drum set players configure their toms like this, where the floor tom is to the right of the snare and the rack tom is above the snare. This is an ergonomic setup that makes it easy to move around the drums and play grooves or fills. From here, your students can add more rack toms or floor toms, setting them up in such a way that they descend in pitch from left to right, or from right to left if they set the kit up in a left-handed orientation. Now let's move on to the cymbals. The cymbals to my left are hi-hats. There's a bottom cymbal that rests on the stand, and a top cymbal that can be raised and lowered by a pedal. If I keep the pedal pressed down, the hi-hats give a short sound that's very articulate and pointed. If I raise my pedal and open the hi-hats, I'll get a more washy sound since the cymbals are now vibrating against each other. You can adjust the position of the top cymbal on a hi-hat stand to achieve different levels of openness with the cymbals. And your students can combine closed hi-hat sounds with open hi-hat sounds to spice up their grooves. You'll see a lot of drum set players play this way, where the dominant hand is crossing over the non-dominant hand to play the hi-hats. That's because in most grooves, you're going to be playing more hi-hat notes than snare drum notes. Your students can try this, or they can try playing open-handed where the hands don't cross. I've known some left-handed percussionists who like to play this way, mostly because in their band classes, they were with a lot of right-handed percussionists, so they had to adapt to a right-handed setup. To my right, we have the ride cymbal. Ride cymbals are usually the largest cymbals used on drum set, and they provide a clear, pointed sound. Your students can play here on the bow of the cymbal, which is the most characteristic general sound of a ride cymbal. Or they can experiment with incorporating the bell of the cymbal for a higher pitched sound that's more piercing. For band music, most composers will indicate when the performer should play on the bell. Finally, there's the crash cymbal. Crash cymbals are typically smaller in diameter than ride cymbals, and although you could play them the same way you play a ride cymbal, you'll typically play crash cymbals by hitting the edge of the cymbal with the shoulder of the drumstick, which gives you a sound similar to orchestral crash cymbals. Just like tom-toms, your students can add more crash cymbals and ride cymbals to the drum set to expand their sound capabilities. But as long as you have at least one of each of these in your band room, your students should have everything they need for their drum set parts. So now that you know how many components there are on a drum set, it's easy to see why students are going to want to find a setup that works comfortably for them. This is definitely going to vary from student to student. And percussionists who sit down at a drum set usually have to spend at least a couple seconds making little adjustments here and there to the height or the angle of different instruments. But even with these little adjustments, bad habits can still sneak in if your students aren't careful.
No, Mr. Boomerang, this feels fine.
So I'll show you some common bad habits to watch for with your students. It's important to find a proper position for the drum throne. Drum thrones are height adjustable, and your students will want to experiment to find the most comfortable height for them. If the throne is too low, your students may have to reach up to play taller instruments, like the ragtime or the crash cymbal. This can also result in a lot of unintentional snare drum rims. But on the flip side, if the throne is set too high, your students can reach the taller instruments easily, but they'll have to reach down to play the snare drum, and the angle of their legs will probably make it uncomfortable to use the pedals. In addition to finding the right height, it's important to find the right distance from the drum set. If the throne is too far away, your students will have to reach out with their arms and legs to play. But if the throne is too close, they'll have to hold the elbows back while they play, instead of comfortably keeping them next to the torso. With the correct throne height and placement established, your students can find the best orientation of each instrument. For my ragtime, I want to find a good angle that allows me to not have to reach very far to play with a proper stick angle. If the ragtime is flat, I have to awkwardly reach up to play it without hitting rim shots. The same goes for my crash cymbal and ride cymbal. With this angle, I don't have to reach very far to play, and I can easily reach the bell, the bow, and the edge of both cymbals. I'm also able to choke the cymbals without having to use too much effort. But if the cymbals are too high or too far away, it makes it harder to achieve all the different characteristic sounds, and I have to reach out or lean over to muffle the cymbals. The position of the hi-hat is also important to consider. If the hi-hat is too close to me, I may have to bring my elbows back to play. Also, I may have to angle my left leg more to use the pedal effectively, which can get pretty uncomfortable over time. But if it's too far away, it'll be tough to incorporate it with the other instruments, and my left leg will have to stick out to use the pedal. It sounds like a lot to think about, but you'll be able to easily spot these issues with your students. It may be obvious when you see them play, or it might cause inconsistencies in their playing. Either way, you'll want to make your students aware of anything that you see or hear that noticeably affects their ability to play accurately and comfortably. Now we're going to talk about coordination. With other percussion instruments, there's at least some level of coordination involved. But drum set involves the most coordination, and it's a skill that may not come so easily to every student.
Is this it, Mr. Boehme?
I like to start beginning students away from the drum set, so they aren't too intimidated by all the different instruments around them. Plus, if they can understand how each of their limbs work separately and together, it'll help them dissect all the different grooves in their drum set parts. So instead of thinking of specific instruments, right now I'm just thinking of right hand, right foot, left foot. For the first groove, your right hand's just going to play 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you're going to add the right foot on beat 1, keeping the right hand the same. So now you've got foot, 2, 3, 4, foot, 2, 3, 4. Once you got the hang of that, we can take the right foot out and we'll focus on adding the left hand. We're going to add the left hand on beat 3. So with just our hands, we've got one hand, both hands, one hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. And once that's comfortable, take the left hand out. Now start with your right hand. And once that's comfy, you're just going to add the right foot on beat 1. Foot, 2, 3, 4. Foot. And when this is comfy, you can add the left hand on beat 3. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Foot, 2, both, 4. Essentially we have foot and hand, both hands, hand. Think you've got it? Let's try it on a drum set. I'm going to take the same pattern and assign my right hand to the hi-hats my left hand to the snare drum, and my right foot to the kick drum. All my left foot is doing is keeping the hi-hat pedal held down. In this clip, you can hear me break down the groove the same way we just broke it down away from the drum set. Building the groove one element at a time is a useful tactic for your students to learn new grooves. Once your students are grooving on this, they can start adding other notes to spice up the groove, which is just going to help them build their independence and coordination even more. In this clip, I've added one kick drum note on beat 2, keeping my hands the same. When doing this, I like to focus on the hi-hat since it's filling up every beat. Then, all I have to think about is lining up the kick drum notes vertically with the hi-hat notes. In this case, independence actually becomes dependence. Once that pattern is solid, I might move the second kick drum note over to beat 3. With this pattern, both hands and my right foot are playing a note all at the same time on beat 3, which we actually haven't experienced yet. And if I move the second kick drum to beat 4, the pattern is more similar to our 1-2 pattern. But now, the kick drum on 4 feels like a lead-in to the kick drum on 1, so this pattern actually feels pretty different. Then your students can cycle through each pattern as a coordination exercise, familiarizing themselves with each variation of the pattern. In this clip, I'm actually playing the patterns as eighth notes rather than quarter notes. Playing it this way, you can hear that the patterns sound more like actual grooves, because each pattern can be used as a building block for a groove. And once your students are comfortable with that, they can add more characteristic drum set elements, such as open hi-hat notes leading into new patterns, or cymbal crashes on the downbeat of each pattern. If your students practice exercises like these regularly, they'll build their vocabulary of grooves, mixing and matching different patterns to come up with unique beats.
Oh, I get it, Mr. Boehme.
And that's just scratching the surface when it comes to coordination. Once your students explore jazz and Latin and Brazilian and other styles of music, they're going to come across more and more challenging grooves that are going to call for different levels of independence and coordination. But starting your students out with these basic exercises is going to help them dissect new grooves in future drum set parts. Finally, we're going to talk about implement options. Although your students are going to be able to cover the majority of their drum set parts with the same drumsticks they use for concert snare drum, there are going to be some times in wind band or jazz band when composers ask for some other kind of implement. This can be done in order to achieve a certain style, or it can be done to help the drum set balance with the rest of the ensemble. So let's look at a few different drum set implements that you're going to want to have in your band room. These are brushes. They come in a few different varieties, but in general, the bristles will be made of either metal, wood, or plastic. These are commonly found in jazz tunes, especially ballads. The bristles provide an articulation that is unique, and much lighter and softer than a drumstick. In this clip, I'm using bundle sticks. This specific model is the ProMark Hot Rods. As the name bundle sticks suggests, these are made up of a bundle of smaller sticks, which gives a much softer articulation than drumsticks. These can be useful in subdued ensemble moments where the drum set sound needs to sound like a drumstick, but at a very soft dynamic. This other model is the Salyers Kendo sticks. These have a bundle on one end, but the other end resembles the butt of a regular drumstick. With these, your students can quickly switch between soft and loud dynamics with the flip of a stick. And I actually didn't get a video of this last implement, but they're very useful for drum set. These are Vigfirth swizzle sticks, which have a drumstick bead on one end and a chamois mallet on the other end. Similar to the kendo sticks, the swizzle sticks allow your students to switch between different sounds easily and quickly. Your students can invest in their own brushes and bundle sticks and other implements, but it's also a good idea to have a variety of different implements in your band room. Having multiple implement options allows your students to achieve multiple dynamics and styles, which is only going to further enhance their musicianship. I hope this video gave you a thorough introduction to drum set. It's a beast of an instrument, and it can be challenging to get the hang of all the different coordination and other concepts that are involved. But it's a very rewarding instrument to learn, and it's one that allows your students to step out of their comfort zone. That's it for now. I'm Ryan Boehme, and thanks for tuning in to So You Want to Teach Percussion.